We're here on Master Surveillant Mindset on Northwest Digital News. Darin Fredrickson, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson here on the broadcast. He thought I was going to say Kyle Ferguson, and I was going to, but
Fine,
that's
Kyle.
That's Kyle the pirate. So, yeah. Anyway, we're going to have some conversation around crime culture, and it's an interesting thing. Darin, I'm curious on your observations on some of these things, because you work a lot of metro areas around the United States, from coast to coast, north to south, and all the areas in between. And so I'm curious about some of the things that you're seeing going on in our country, and maybe what you think is contributing to it. Because let's just start with the word hate. And it's becoming easier, like people are connecting hate to crime. In fact, the FBI reported that from 2016 to 2017, hate crimes increased by 17%. Again, we saw the same thing jump from 2017 to 2018. And just curious what some of your thoughts on why we're seeing this statistic go up, and why we're seeing, some of the events that even happened just over this past weekend. Not just here in the United States, but overseas as well.
Well, when you look at crime overall, the hate crime legislation has always bothered me, and not just me, it's bothered the law enforcement community overall. Hate crime is legislation that basically is trying to look inside someone's mind. Now, sometimes there's blatant writings, right? There's manifestos written, there's statements made that would lead somebody to believe, okay, that's a hate motivated crime. But a crime is a crime. There's crimes in the laws that are already there to take care of what needs to be done. So basically creating laws that deal with hate crime is basically, like I said, looking into someone's mind. But then it comes down to speech. So that kind of transitions into political correctness, where this law is more like a political correctness law, where you can't say anything that would offend somebody because, you don't want to offend anybody, right? Mm-hmm. I look at even, like, I have some law enforcement friends that have connections to Seattle, and I believe it was just last year, and I know you guys are kind of close. Seattle actually came out with a policy where they can't even refer to suspects on the radio. I don't know if you remember hearing this. On the police radio, they can't refer to suspects as suspects. They can't say a black male suspect or a black male. They can't even describe the suspects that they're in pursuit of. They have to call them, I believe it's citizens. I was trying to look it up what the actual term was, and I think they have to call them like in pursuit of a citizen. And then they want to try to control the descriptions putting out. And granted, this is police officers communicating with each other that are trying to find a suspect. And to find a suspect, you need a description. You're well aware that I wrote the book Racial Profiling, or co-authored the book Racial Profiling. This book was largely written because of the miscommunication or the misunderstanding of what a racial profile is versus a criminal profile. This book became a result of political correctness. Mm-hmm. And so it makes law enforcement's job a lot more difficult, because let's look at the drug situation once. Where do the drugs come into the U.S.? Primarily from Mexico, the contracts with South America. Drugs come in through our border. If anybody was totally in clueless, Mexican cartels operate most of these drug distribution routes into the U.S. So who are you going to disproportionately have arrested for drug trafficking? At least in Arizona, let's say, or California, you're going to have Mexican either illegals or of origin from Mexico. That has nothing to do with the race being the part of it. Mm-hmm. And so just look at the term racial profiling. It's not a racial profile. It's either discrimination or it's not discrimination. And so that's why we wrote the book, to basically clarify or eliminate the confusion between the two. There's a criminal profile of a drug trafficker. Race might be an element of it. But political correctness overall has taken away a lot of the ability to try to do your job, because, at least in law enforcement, because people will construe that you're being racist. There was a study that just came out last year that showed that most Americans, young Americans and Black Americans, are disapproving of the whole political correctness nation, if you want to call it that, if that makes sense. They don't like the PC culture, like you mentioned.
Well, PC culture is, in my opinion, is nothing more than an attempt by given people to quell freedom of speech. That is really what it is.
Absolutely.
There, of course, there are things that people shouldn't say if they're going to be respectful of others and that sort of thing. But at the same token, I've listened to when you mention even in the realm of police work, I've listened to people describe a given suspect that they're looking for, and it's like, why wouldn't you mention what they're if it's a white person, or it's an Asian person, or it's a Black person, because these all immediately create a totally different type of look. Why would you simply say that it's a male, 6'2" in height and has dark hair, and leave it at that, and just let people be puzzled as to, well, any clue as to the nationality of the person? I mean, we have no problem whatsoever looking out in a field and saying, that's a Jersey cow, or that's a Angus, or that's a Hereford, or whatever, because it helps us realize it's either the black cow or the red cow. So why would we be so stupid when it comes to people and pretend like this is things we don't know?
No, and the hardest thing when I transitioned from law enforcement into the private sector and working for corporations and working for private investigation firms and working for lawyers and doing cases is, they, for some reason, do not want you to put a Hispanic, that you're good with Hispanic male, you're good with every other male except for Black male. They want the first report I read said AAM, and I'm like, what is, and this was from a retailer, a major one. I said, what is AAM? I have no idea what AAM, and they're like African American male. And I'm like, well, so I was actually in the private sector. I'm not supposed to refer, if I write a report on a suspect, I'm not supposed to put Black male suspect. I'm supposed to put African American male. And I'm like, so, but then you listen on the radio or you watch videos, and even in the Black community, they call themselves Black. But then, what do you call? Do you call them African American? Do you call them Black? It just creates confusion. And then in their community, they basically say whatever they want, right? And they actually can get away with using certain terms just in conversation, that if you or I said that, our careers would be over with. But they have that liberty. And so that was the hardest transition, actually, in creating reports. All of a sudden my mind had to shift into political correctness, and I'm telling you, it's really, really heavy in the private sector. And so you would ask yourself, why is political correctness so heavy, and why can you not say anything? It's because they're worried about liability, they're worried about getting sued, they're worried about hostile workplace environment claims. And so that's just my personal experience, and it kind of made me shake my head, why? But it's political correctness again. And so
it's even interesting that they would refer to the individual as a AAM, because this isn't a subject that I knew a lot about, but I remember years ago, one of my good friends in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area is a Black guy, and the reason why I would even refer to him as a Black guy instead of to say African American male is because we were actually talking about the subject one day, and being that these conversations come up among other people, I felt very comfortable just asking Earl this question. We're very good friends. I didn't have to say anything to him. He'd never think that I was being racist one way or the other. They were just honest questions I'm asking him. And he goes, sure. Kevin, don't refer to me as an African American male. I'm not from Africa. Neither is any of my family. He goes, that's actually one of the funniest things, that people use that as a so-called correct type of label. And he goes, actually, Black people come from many different areas of the world. Africa is just one place. And so he goes, So that's quite funny. Was quite funny to him. So he goes, "I'm not an African American male. I'm just a black guy, and very proud of it too." So
No, and isn't that so true? Because
yes.
if you say black male, or like that covers, just like yeah, like in report we put Asian male, right? But
Yeah.
Asia, you have China, Korea, Japan. Like you have a lot of countries, but you still say Asian male. Black male covers more than African American. Like you said, if I think of it, if I was African American, I would say, why are you calling me, like, I'm an American and I'm black? Why are you calling me African American? And it's almost like I'm not American. I'm African American. I'm like half American.
Yep.
That's the way I would perceive it. I actually think it would be an insult. And I've never asked anybody in the black community, like, what do you think of this term? And you did. And I think it would be offensive if I was American. I was born here. I'm American. That somebody would refer to me as almost half American. So, yeah, but it creates a lot of confusion, havoc, and I don't know really who feels good in the end. Because somebody's going to be offended at some point about something, and we've come a long way, haven't we?
Yeah.
With political correctness.
Yeah.
Look at what it's doing. Terrorists are using political correctness. If nobody is aware of this, like they are using political correctness to actually take over the U.S. without firing a single bullet, is what they've referred to it as, by getting into government, getting into schools, getting into military, and basically creating an environment where they want Sharia law, and they don't have to fire a bullet because they basically take over little by little. And what do? We say, oh no, we don't want to. Okay, we don't want to offend anybody. Anyways, in Minnesota had this problem with an officer who was poorly qualified. This happened a year ago. Minnesota has a lot of Somalian refugees, and they wanted to put a Somali officer in with the Somali community because they could relate better. And this is the trend across the entire U.S. But the Somali officer was poorly qualified, had been disciplined before. You might remember the story, right?
Yeah, I do remember hearing elements about this. Yes.
Yeah, and a victim called about something going on in the neighborhood, and the victim was a female, came out to talk to the officer, and this Somali officer actually fired across another officer and actually killed the person that called the police for help. And it was because he was put in a position where he already had problems with discipline, but they didn't want to get rid of him. And as a matter of fact, the police chief was out hiking, and when she came back, she resigned. She did a public, she did a statement, a press release, and then she retired. Like she was done. Like this was such a mess. And you look at that, and it was because they did not want to take care of a problem because of political correctness, where they left an officer in a position where he took an innocent person's life because he was poorly qualified. And then we had this incident this weekend, which isn't necessarily related, but this was I don't think it was terrorism, but it was a Somali citizen at the Mall of America. And any of you that are parents would be absolutely horrified of this situation where he was upset with being turned down by females he, I guess, approached at the mall, and he wanted to throw an adult over the balcony, but wasn't able to manhandle, I guess, an adult. And so he grabbed a 5-year-old child and threw the child over the balcony 3 stories up. And because he was upset with being shunned by women and not getting the date, whatever it might be. Is that really how we're now taking care of our own personal problems?
Yeah.
He was also banned from the premises like several times too. So he just literally got out of a ban and was able to come onto the property and just right off the bat chucks a 5-year-old kid off the 3rd balcony.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I actually don't know how their security works there at the mall because I've been there several times. We're talking about Mall of America in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I've been there several times to the mall, and I don't know how the heck they would know if this individual had even still been on a ban. How they would know? How they would have any way of tracking, knowing if he was coming to the mall or not? But yeah,
and they would only do it by sight. We deal with trespass a lot, and I dealt with trespass a lot, and it's by sight. Really, if somebody says something and they see the person, then they would say, hey, you're trespassed from this mall, leave. But fortunately, the child, I guess the doctor said his injuries are consistent with falling off a bicycle. He has broken bones, but no major head trauma. And it's actually a miracle that he is doing as well as he is. 3 stories. I mean, it's amazing he's even alive. But it's not how we take care of our personal problems nowadays. At least we're not supposed to be taking care of them.
One of the guys who wrote about this, you've made some comments before about him in the past, Lieutenant Dave Grossman. He actually predicted these kinds of activities and even the school shootings that we think of because of this highly sensitive nature that we're seeing in culture. So I just mentioned before, about some of the terms and things that they're trying to drive as far as our language is concerned. But Dave Grossman talked about this a little bit and said that predicted some of these events. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I've seen David Grossman speak a few times, going back, we're talking 10, 15 years ago, and he predicted school shootings, and this is even before the church shootings. He said the schools are basically soft targets, right? He said terrorists are going to go after soft targets. School shootings had already been in play, and he said you're going to see an increase in church shootings. And sure enough, like we're talking, what, 5 years, in the last 5 years, we've had numerous church shootings. And he even said, when he does his opening, he says, how many of you carry your gun in church? And it's one of those like touchy subjects. And here we go back to political correctness, right? I mean, like, who would carry a gun in church? Because that's where you have God, you have love. I mean, like, who would go into a church and shoot? And he said, if you're not carrying a gun in church and you are a law enforcement officer, you are doing your family, your church, your congregation, your community a disservice. And he was very strong and very adamant about it. And so I carried a gun at church, and I didn't tell people, man. I said, I see why you get here early, so you can get the back bench. And I said, that's good. I said, I hope you're armed. And he goes, absolutely. And I go, good. Then that's where you need to be, is on the back bench. He goes, that's why I'm here. He's already been in a shooting. He already shot and killed a woman a couple years ago. He's former military. And he goes, some people don't like the fact I carry a gun in church. And I said, that's because they don't understand. And David Grossman, 10 years ago, was predicting church shootings, and now look at how many church shootings we have. So I tell law enforcement, where I'm at currently in the state, I can't carry concealed, but I'm going back to a state where I can carry concealed, Arizona. Right. And so I will be carrying my weapon, and I'll be carrying it all the time like I did when I lived there. Things are a little different in California with carrying concealed. So anyways, yeah. So Grossman, like, experts in this industry can see how terrorists practice, and they practice in third world countries or other countries, and what they're doing in those other countries will come to the U.S. and it's come to fruition. And so soft targets are still always going to be vulnerable. And so think about it. Think about going to church and having law enforcement there, or uniform patrol or security. People can't fathom that. They think that a church is a place of sanctuary, and it is. But to terrorists and mad gunmen and active shooters, it's an easy target. So it's we've come a long way. And when people say get rid of the guns, right? We can solve the problem by getting rid of the guns, and then we won't have problems. And I'm not even going to go down that road because it doesn't work. It's just it isn't going to work in the United States. I'm sorry, we're a unique country. We have certain freedoms. There's a reason that the right to possess a firearm is our Second Amendment. The first one is the freedom of speech. There's a reason. It's number 2, and it better stay there.
Yeah,
that's all I can say, because there's a fight to get rid of it. And it's
totally agree. But talking about this soft target, and you mentioned about carrying to church. Either my wife or both of us also carry at church. And it's interesting because that is the last conversation we have in the vehicle before we leave the vehicle and go to sit down in church. And we sit in a very specific spot every single time at church, because immediately off the end of the bench is an exit that goes directly out of the building. It's one that's not accessible from the outside, but you easily go out that direction. So If I happen to not be carrying a firearm with me that Sunday, hey, do you have yours? Do I have mine? Yeah, okay, it's in your purse. Great. All right. So the minute we're aware that there's any danger or whatever else, all I'm using is the word down, but that doesn't mean to just get down and stay down. It means all you and the kids get down and you crawl right out that door. Kick that door open, you crawl right out that door. There's a building that's off some distance behind the church. I said, that's exactly where you go, and you leave the purse right in the bench so I have access to the firearm. I'm coming out the door behind you as well, but I'm going back around to get behind the shooter to take the shooter out. And I was like, it's kind of, people might think that's a little bit strange, but we actually talk about the strategy before every single service we go to there in public, because we are not going to be victims of just an unprepared for something like that. So, and I know I've had conversation with other people as well, other members of the church as well, and aware that they carry, and just had a little conversation with them. And so that is a conversation before church. It's a conversation we go into restaurants. It's a conversation when we go into public places. And it's like, here's what we have to do to make sure that we're safe. So
absolutely. And if it becomes a habit, then it's just automatic. That's just what you do. It's like advanced survey work, right? And people would say that's just too much energy. That's just after you do it enough, like, you don't even have to talk through everything, because you automatically kind of know what you're going to do, where you're going to be. And so people think it's overwhelming. They can't comprehend what you're doing. But hey, you have a plan, right? What's the saying? Plan to fail or fail to plan, or
yeah. It's the interesting thing, and I've probably shared this story with you before, but when you think about all these conversations about racism, and it had gotten so stupid that this was even a number of years ago. This has gotten so stupid that you would hear people who are so scared of pointing out either race differences or culture differences or things like that between people, because America is really a melting pot of all kinds of different people. And so when I had first taken over the recruit camp in the military, there was a pretty high number of these kinds of complaints by these new soldiers coming into the Army. And I gave some thought about it to it one evening, and I was like, how do we squish this before it even gets started? Mm-hmm. And the only way that I could come up with on the spur of the moment was I had several different NCOs that were in my staff, and some cadets from the Army cadets. And among them was this black Cadet Terrell. And so I had Terrell come up to the front of the classroom, where all the soldiers are seated in this classroom format, and I bring him up to the front of the class, and I was testing this "I don't see color" sentence that you would hear from people, and I would just say, "Cadet Terrell and I have the same mom, same dad. Put your hand up if you don't believe me." And a few people would just very timidly raise their hand, but most of the hands stayed down, because they didn't want to be called out on the carpet as being so-called racist. And I just said, if you don't see the difference between Terrell and I, go over here and see Sergeant Magnan. We need to get you kicked out of the Army immediately, because you will, in a deployed situation, you will cross friendly lines. You will be out there in enemy territory. Our soldiers are going to come back, and if you can't tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys, so you just shoot people indiscriminately who come to our where our camp is, I cannot have you in this Army. So I'm going to ask the question again. Terrell and I have the same mom, same dad. Who in the audience can tell the difference? Mm-hmm. And then all the hands would go up. And I said, that by definition is the word discriminate. The fact that you can discriminate, that you can tell the difference, is a sign of intelligence. So every one of you better be able to tell the difference between Terrell and I, and you better be able to tell the difference between an Iraqi soldier, an American soldier, or any other person who's in your chain of command. And if you can't tell the difference, get over there right now so we can get you kicked out of this Army. We can't have you here. You're a risk to everybody who's around you. And so then we went into the other words, which were prejudice and things like that. And when people understood that, I can tell you that for all the years I ran that camp, I never had one single prejudice and or discrimination complaint in the camp ever. They had no idea how am I going to frame this to this guy so that he gets what I'm saying? It never even came up. They never played the race card even one time.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to be real about these conversations, and for people who are dedicated to this so-called political correctness, all you're doing is cheating yourself out of the truth. And I think about these very, whether they're hate motivated or whatever they're being motivated by, I think of all these bad things that are going on around the country and in these major metro areas around the United States. And part of it has to do is we've oversensitized people, and we've made them think that words like black or male or female or white or all these different things are so-called bad words, and to me it's just nonsense.
Well, that, and then how are we supposed to report suspicious incidents when, like the majority of terrorists that we're dealing with right now are of Middle Eastern descent, right? I mean,
correct.
If we're honest. So if you see suspicious behavior, like they did in Sacramento, I believe it was, where the husband-wife team went and shot up at a Christmas party or wherever it was, like people had seen things, but they didn't want to say anything. Why? Oh, you're racist. Well, so it's a catch-22. You want to report suspicious behavior, but all of a sudden, then you're labeled a racist if you're wrong. And so people are afraid to report anything, crime-wise, terrorist-wise, suspicious-wise. And you use the term like discriminate and bias. Guess what? Every one of us discriminate. Every one of us are biased. It's whether it's unfair. Do you think insurance companies discriminate?
Absolutely, they do. Yes, most definitely.
Yeah. Guess what? You have a 500 score. You have an 800 score. Guess what? You're gonna get different interest rate. Is that discrimination? Yeah. Is it unfair? Probably not, because you're a risk, right? We're all biased. I like certain cars. You like certain cars. You like certain trucks. There's nothing wrong with being biased. It's when all this is unfair, and that's what it comes down to. Is it unfair discrimination, or is it fair discrimination? So, yeah, it's a real interesting time to live, where things just seem so confusing, and really they're so simple. But there's a reason why there's confusion put out there, and that's to make us less safe and make certain agendas more powerful, and they're just using manipulation to do it. And it's if you open your eyes and look and research it, it's there. And everybody, like you said, people I think underneath know there's something going on, but they're still afraid to come out and be noticed or be exposed and be vulnerable, really, is what it comes down to.
Well, great stuff. And I think the whole political correctness culture has led to a lot of these things, and really helped degrade our society and get people to run away from the truth. It's kind of interesting because all these different tags and titles, name calling that people are engaging with online. I have, in my own life experience, found that the minute somebody starts calling somebody else, any name or any under whatever umbrella, whether it's xenophobic or it's white nationalist or it's racist or anything else, the minute they start going that route, there's absolutely no substance in the rest of the language that they have to offer, because there's nothing there, and you're just
no.
It was even funny because we are all very familiar with Ocasio-Cortez, who has had all of these disparaging things to say about the president, and she was just recently on a show, and she said she's very much in favor of seeing him impeached. This was after the Mueller report and everything else came out, and so the host very astutely immediately says, well, give me, so let's say if you're on the committee putting together this impeachment thing, what would be the top 3 things that you would be putting on the impeachment documents? And she was like, well, and he goes, just the top 3. What would they be? You're the one writing the committee. You're the one writing up the documents. What would the top 3 be? And she sits there hemming and haw for a minute, and then completely disconnected with all of the conversation that's been going on in the news, she says, well, the fact that he's profiting, like some of his businesses are profiting from the economy going on, that's one of the things. And then she's sitting there, and then like number 2, it was all this awkward space where she had nothing to say, and then is going, okay, yeah, what would the third one be? And again, totally disconnected from. It just shows you how this political and mindless drivel that's coming out of all these people's mouths has nothing to do with the truth.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, like, it just boggles your mind, doesn't it? I mean, everything that comes out of her mouth, even with Amazon not going to New York, and she's like, well, we have better ways to spend all that money. Like, why do we need to give them the money? And people are like, no, you don't understand. Like, that's money we don't have that we're going to get when they come here and create all these jobs and all these taxes. Then we're going to give them a little break. And she did not get it. And she's, and then, you're saying I don't know taxes and numbers. And it's like, no, you don't. And thus, Amazon is not going to New York.
The brilliant leaders in Seattle didn't get it either, so Amazon is pulling roots and heading over to Bellingham. So
are they really?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
You know what? It comes down to the mighty dollar, and you know what? Businesses can make choices, just like we can make choices, and I don't fault any business for going to where it's a better business environment, because that's what they're in business for. Whether you like them or dislike them, they're in business. And they employ people, and there's loopholes, but yeah, wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
So Kyle here is searching glasses of water, and I know exactly where this is going. Nancy Pelosi got asked this question. She's been asked several times about Ocasio-Cortez, and it's because of all the things, the conversations that she's been at the root of. And so then Nancy Pelosi, I don't know how she thought she was going to say this. She's overseas. I don't know how she thought she was going to say this without this getting back here to the U.S., but she said that Ocasio-Cortez's district is so left-leaning that virtually a glass of water with a D behind it would be elected there. Oh. And she holds up a glass of water to show this argument. And you know what? For those people in our viewing audience, I hope you aren't Republican because somebody has an R behind it and that's just what you pledge allegiance to. You should know exactly why you are. I hope you aren't Democrat because, as Nancy said, it's just a glass of water and you would vote for it if it had a D behind it. I hope you're actually smart enough to educate yourself on the appropriate topics and the appropriate things that are going on in this country, because as we are learning more and more, actually 70-80% of the people here in America do agree, regardless of party affiliation, do agree on the common sense things. And many of them have no time for political correctness and all this garbage titles that we love to throw and everything just to squelch freedom of speech and all the other freedoms that we have here as Americans. Well, Darin, always love to hear your perspective on all these various subjects here on Master Surveillant Mindset. We're looking forward to hearing from you in person coming up here in less than 2 weeks, May 4th.
So close.
Darin Fredrickson will be in Longview and speaking on the stage just ahead of Dinesh D'Souza. So,
who a plug for him? That movie he did, America Imagine the World Without Her.
Yeah,
I think he goes into the true story of democracy and everything. So, yes,
great stuff.
Exciting.
All right, thanks everybody who joined us here on the broadcast. Darin Fredrickson, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson here at the broadcast desk. Thanks for joining us here on Master Surveillant Mindset on Northwest Digital News. Take care.
This concludes today's live programming on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast. Heard around the world in more than 70 countries on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and Twitch TV. If you enjoyed a story or guest we had here on Northwest Digital News and would like to strut your stuff on the broadcast, email us today at wainfo2017@gmail.com or call or text to 360-545-3501. We're always interested in unique stories, topics, and guests to share with our worldwide audience. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and comment on the live stream. And for those of you who'd like to financially support the broadcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Northwest Digital News. We thank you for your patronage. On behalf of Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgeson, Stephanie Hunter, and all the people that made this broadcast possible, I'm Kevin Hunter. Till next time, take care.